My mother poured cold water over my 7-year-old daughter's head as discipline and told the family I was overreacting when I banned her. So I gave her a tribute she will never forget. My mother always said I was too soft on my daughter Mia, who was 7 and the sweetest kid who loved reading and drawing and never caused trouble. Mom raised me with wooden spoons and belt threats and cold showers as punishment, and thought it made me strong even though I spent years in therapy dealing with what she did to me. When Mia was born, I told Mom clearly that I would handle all discipline, and she was just grandma who gave hugs and cookies. Mom said modern parenting was creating weak children but agreed to respect my rules. She didn't respect anything. It started small with Mom telling Mia she couldn't have dessert until she finished vegetables I'd already said she didn't have to eat. Then Mom started putting Mia in timeout when I wasn't looking for things like talking too loud or running in the house. I'd find Mia crying in the corner and Mom would say she was helping me since I was obviously too tired to notice bad behavior. There was no bad behavior, just a normal 7-year-old being a child. I told Mom to stop and she said she'd raised me just fine and knew better than some parenting book. The real problems began when I had to work late shifts at the hospital and Mom watched Mia 3 nights a week. Mia started coming to me saying Grandma was mean but wouldn't say specifics. She'd get quiet when Mom entered the room and stopped wanting to visit her. Mom said Mia was being dramatic and manipulative, which was rich coming from the woman who faked chest pains whenever I disagreed with her. One night I came home early and heard Mia sobbing upstairs. I found her standing in the bathroom with her hands against the wall while Mom poured cold water over her head. Mom was saying this would teach her not to spill juice on the carpet. Mia was shaking and apologizing over and over, while Mom said apologies meant nothing without consequences. I grabbed Mia and wrapped her in towels while screaming at Mom to get out. Mom said I was overreacting to a little water and Mia needed to learn responsibility. She said her parents did the same to her and she turned out successful. I told her she turned out cruel and banned her from our house. Mom told the whole family I was keeping Mia from her over a minor disagreement. She said I was vindictive and using my child as a weapon. She called crying to relatives saying she just wanted to help, and I was too proud to accept it. My Aunt Linda called saying I should forgive Mom because she meant well. My Uncle James said Mom was from a different generation and didn't know better. My cousin Beth said I'd regret cutting off Mia's grandmother over parenting differences. None of them knew about the cold water or the other things I'd started discovering. Mia finally told me Mom had been making her stand in the corner holding heavy books over her head. If Mia's arms dropped, Mom added more time. Mom had been making Mia write lines hundreds of times about being respectful and obedient. Mom had been taking away Mia's books and toys and making her earn them back through chores. Mom had been telling Mia she was disappointing me, and if she was better behaved, maybe Mommy wouldn't have to work so much. That's when I decided Mom needed to understand consequences herself. Mom's husband Carl was 68 and completely controlled by Mom. She decided what he ate, wore, watched, and said. She monitored his phone and email. She gave him an allowance from his own pension. She made him ask permission to see his own friends. Carl had been broken down by 40 years of Mom's discipline and just went along with everything to avoid her anger. I started inviting Carl over when Mom was at her church meetings. I fed him foods Mom had banned like pizza and ice cream. I let him watch action movies Mom said were too violent. I gave him beer Mom said was poison. Carl was confused but happy to have some freedom. He started opening up about how Mom controlled everything, and he felt like a prisoner in his own home. He said he used to fight back, but Mom would punish him with silent treatment and locked bedrooms and hidden car keys until he gave up. Week 2, I told Carl he could use my address for deliveries if he wanted to order things without Mom knowing. Carl ordered a leather jacket Mom would hate. He ordered video games he'd wanted for years. He ordered spicy snacks Mom said would kill him. He'd come over while Mom was gone and enjoy his contraband like a teenager hiding from parents. He even started standing up straighter and smiling more. Week 3, I suggested Carl join a bowling league that met during Mom's book club. Carl said Mom would never allow it, but I said what she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. Carl signed up and bought his own bowling ball and shoes. He made friends with men his age who didn't know Mom. He was good at bowling and his team started winning. He'd never looked happier than when he showed me his first trophy. The revelation came during Mom's birthday party. The whole family was there and Mom was holding court about how today's parents were failures and children needed firm hands. She started her usual speech about how she'd raised me right despite my defiance. That's when I announced I had a surprise video tribute for Mom. I pressed play on the remote and the big screen lit up with the title slide I'd designed myself. The first clip started and there was Mia in Mom's kitchen corner, her little arms stretched up holding 2 thick textbooks over her head. Her face was red and tears streamed down her cheeks while she bit her lip trying not to cry out loud. Mom's voice came through crystal clear on the audio, sharp and mean like always. She was saying if Mia's arms dropped even 1 inch, she'd add 10 more minutes to the punishment. I watched Mom's face across the room turn white as paper when she recognized her own voice. Her hand went to her throat and she opened her mouth but nothing came out. The relatives around her started whispering to each other, confused looks spreading across their faces. I kept my eyes on Mom while the video played and saw the exact moment she realized this wasn't the tribute she'd been expecting. Her hands started trembling on the table in front of her. The second clip began and showed Mia sitting at Mom's kitchen table with a notebook in front of her. The camera angle caught everything perfectly because I'd hidden the nanny cam in Mia's backpack that she always brought to Grandma's house. Mia's hand moved across the page, writing the same sentence over and over. I will be respectful and obedient. I will be respectful and obedient. I will be respectful and obedient. The pages flipped and more lines appeared, hundreds of them in Mia's careful 7-year-old handwriting. Mom's voice came through again, telling Mia she had 300 more lines to go before bedtime, and if she complained, she'd add another 100. Mom's hands were shaking harder now, and several relatives gasped out loud. Aunt Linda put her hand over her mouth and stared at the screen. Carl sat frozen in his chair 3 tables away from Mom with an expression I couldn't read. His face was pale and his eyes were locked on the video like he couldn't look away even if he wanted to. The video shifted and suddenly there was Carl on screen laughing at the bowling alley. He wore the leather jacket he'd ordered to my house and he looked 10 years younger than usual. His bowling team cheered when he got a strike and Mitchell clapped him on the back. The next clip showed Carl eating pizza at my kitchen table with a huge grin on his face. Then Carl playing video games with a controller in his hands, completely focused and happy. Then Carl at the bowling alley again receiving his first trophy, while his teammates celebrated around him. The difference between this Carl and the Carl who sat at family dinners was shocking. In these clips, he stood straight and smiled real smiles that reached his eyes. At family dinners, he hunched over and barely spoke. Mom tried to stand up, but Aunt Linda grabbed her arm and pulled her back down. Everyone was too shocked to move or speak. They just stared at the screen showing Carl's transformation over the past 2 months. My voice started playing over the video, and I explained how Mom didn't just hurt children. She destroyed anyone under her control. The screen showed screenshots of Carl's phone with Mom's monitoring app visible. I detailed how Mom tracked every call and text Carl made, how she read his emails and deleted messages from his friends. The video showed Carl's bank statements with the tiny allowance Mom gave him from his own pension check. I explained how Carl had to ask permission to see his friends or buy anything for himself. How Mom decided what he ate and wore and watched on television. Several relatives turned in their seats to look at Carl. He was staring down at his hands now with tears running down his face. His shoulders shook and he didn't wipe the tears away. Uncle James shifted uncomfortably and Cousin Beth's mouth hung open. The room was dead silent except for my voice on the recording. The final section of the video started and I'd saved the worst for last. The clip showed Mia in Mom's bathroom with her hands against the wall. This was footage from my phone that night I came home early. Mom stood behind Mia pouring cold water from a pitcher over Mia's head. Mia was sobbing and shaking, her little body trembling from the cold. She kept saying sorry over and over in a tiny, scared voice. Mom's voice was cold and hard, saying apologies meant nothing without consequences. The water kept pouring and Mia kept crying and shaking. Then the video showed Mom telling Mia that she disappointed me, that if Mia behaved better, maybe Mommy wouldn't have to work so much. More clips played showing the psychological torture Mom put Mia through, taking away her books and toys, making her earn them back through chores that were too hard for a 7-year-old, the constant criticism and blame. My own voice came back explaining the years of therapy I needed to recover from Mom's parenting, how the wooden spoons and belt threats and cold showers had damaged me in ways that took decades to heal. The room was completely silent now except for the video audio. Even the restaurant staff had stopped moving to watch. The screen went black and the video ended. I stood up slowly and looked directly at Mom across the room. I told her this was what real consequences looked like. Not cold water or wooden spoons or making children hold books until their arms gave out. Real consequences meant truth and accountability. It meant everyone seeing exactly what she'd done without her lies and manipulation to hide it. Mom's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. Her face had gone from white to red and back to white again. Her usual confident control was completely shattered and she looked small and confused sitting there. Her hands clutched the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Uncle James found his voice first and started sputtering about how I had no right to record in Mom's home. He said I humiliated her publicly, and this was cruel and vindictive. His face was red and he was half standing from his chair. I stayed calm and explained that the nanny cam was in my belongings that Mia brought to grandmother's house. It was perfectly legal to record in my own property, even if that property was temporarily at someone else's house. I'd checked with a lawyer before the party to make sure. Aunt Linda wasn't looking at Uncle James or me. She kept looking between Mom and the blank screen where the video had played. Her face showed the exact moment her earlier defense of Mom crumbled. She'd told me to forgive Mom, said Mom meant well, and was just from a different generation. Now she'd seen with her own eyes what Mom had done to Mia, and there was no way to make excuses for it. Carl stood up suddenly and his chair scraped loudly against the restaurant floor. Everyone turned to look at him. He looked directly at Mom for the first time since the video started and said in a clear, steady voice that he was moving out tonight. His voice didn't shake or waver. Mitchell stood up too from the table where I'd seated him and immediately offered Carl his guest room. Mitchell said Carl could stay as long as he needed. Mom finally found her voice and started screaming that Carl couldn't leave, that he was her husband. Her voice was shrill and desperate. She stood up and tried to move toward Carl, but her legs seemed shaky. She grabbed the table for support and kept screaming that Carl belonged to her, that he couldn't just walk away from 40 years of marriage. Carl looked at Mom and said he stopped being her husband years ago. He said he'd become her prisoner instead, and he was done being controlled. He thanked me for showing him what freedom looked like and said he should have left decades ago. His voice was stronger now, and he stood straighter than I'd ever seen him stand. Mitchell put his hand on Carl's shoulder and started guiding him toward the restaurant exit. Mom shrieked and tried to follow, but her legs wouldn't work right. She screamed threats about money and property and abandonment. She said Carl would have nothing without her, that he'd come crawling back. Mitchell and Carl kept walking and didn't look back. Several other relatives stood up too, creating chaos as people didn't know whether to stay or leave. Cousin Beth appeared in front of me suddenly with her face twisted in anger. She said I destroyed the family and could have handled this privately. Her voice was loud enough that people at other tables turned to look. I told her I tried private conversations and boundaries. I tried talking to Mom directly and setting clear rules about Mia. Mom violated every single one while manipulating the family against me. I said she called everyone crying and lying about minor disagreements when she'd been abusing my daughter. Beth's face got redder and she opened her mouth to argue more. Fiona stepped up beside me then, my coworker who'd helped me plan this whole intervention. She didn't say anything, but her presence next to me was solid support. Beth looked between us and seemed to realize she wasn't going to win this argument. She turned and stormed toward the exit where several other relatives were already leaving. Uncle James stood up from his table and walked toward the exit without saying another word to Mom. Aunt Linda followed him but stopped next to me first. She touched my arm and said she needed time to process everything she just saw. Her voice was quiet and shaky. I nodded and she left too. More relatives started gathering their things and heading for the door. Some of them looked at Mom with disgust while others looked confused or upset. Cousin Beth's husband grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit even though she kept trying to argue with him. The restaurant manager appeared near our private room looking worried about all the commotion. Fiona touched my shoulder and gestured toward the back hallway where she'd been watching Mia during the video. I followed her and found Mia sitting at a small table coloring with Fiona's daughter Anna. Mia looked up when I walked in and asked if we could go home now. I picked her up and carried her out the back entrance to avoid the chaos still happening in the main room. Fiona walked with us to my car and helped me buckle Mia into her seat. She told me I did the right thing and she'd see me at work tomorrow. I drove home with Mia asking questions about why everyone looked so mad at the party. I explained that sometimes grown-ups need to see the truth even when it's uncomfortable and makes them upset. Mia thought about this and said she was glad she didn't have to see Grandma's face during the video. That night around 9, my phone rang with Mitchell's number. I answered and heard Carl's voice on the other end sounding different from I'd ever heard him before. He was talking faster and his words didn't have that usual defeated tone. He told me he grabbed his important papers from the filing cabinet while Mom was still at the restaurant. He took his birth certificate and social security card, and the deed to the house his parents left him that Mom claimed was lost. He packed 2 suitcases of clothes and his medications. Mitchell was letting him stay in the guest bedroom for as long as he needed. Carl said Mitchell already offered to drive him to a lawyer's office tomorrow morning. His voice cracked when he thanked me for showing him he didn't have to live like a prisoner anymore. I told him I was proud of his courage and I'd help him with whatever he needed. He asked if I thought Mom would try to force him to come back. I said she probably would, but he was a grown man who could make his own choices. We talked for another 20 minutes about practical things like bank accounts and car insurance. Carl sounded lighter with every minute that passed. The next morning, I woke up to 47 text messages and 12 missed calls. I scrolled through them while drinking coffee. Some relatives sent supportive messages saying they had no idea how bad Mom's behavior was. Others sent angry messages calling me cruel and vindictive for humiliating Mom publicly. My cousin on Dad's side said the video made her physically sick, and she was cutting off contact with Mom permanently. Aunt Linda's daughter messaged that her mom cried all night about not protecting me or Mia better. Cousin Beth sent 3 long messages defending Mom and saying I manipulated the footage to make things look worse than they were. I blocked the hostile numbers immediately, and only responded to people who acknowledged what Mom did was abuse. Mia came into the kitchen asking for cereal and sat down at the table with her bowl. She looked at me seriously and asked if Grandma was going to come back to our house. I knelt down next to her chair and promised that would never happen. I told her Grandma couldn't come here anymore and we were safe. Mia nodded and went back to eating her cereal, like that was all the reassurance she needed. 3 days later, Aunt Linda called while I was folding laundry. Her voice was thick from crying and she could barely get words out at first. She apologized over and over for pressuring me to forgive Mom and expose Mia to an abuser. She said she always made excuses for Mom because confronting her seemed too hard and scary. She admitted she saw warning signs over the years, but told herself Mom was just strict and old-fashioned. She said watching that video made her realize she'd been enabling abuse for decades. I listened without interrupting and let her finish everything she needed to say. When she finally stopped talking, I told her I appreciated her honesty. I explained that our relationship would take time to rebuild because she'd pushed me to put my daughter in danger. She said she understood and would do whatever it took to earn back my trust. I told her that meant respecting my boundaries completely and never defending Mom's actions again. She agreed immediately and asked if she could see Mia sometime when I felt ready. I said maybe in a few months after Mia finished some therapy sessions. Carl met with a lawyer named Robert Chen the following week. Mitchell drove him to the appointment and waited in the lobby. The lawyer spent 2 hours going through all of Carl's documents and asking questions about the marriage. Carl called me that evening to report what he learned. The lawyer explained that Mom had been controlling everything illegally because Carl never signed any power of attorney documents. She had no legal right to monitor his accounts or give him an allowance from his own pension. The lawyer said Carl could reclaim complete financial independence and should consider filing for legal separation. He explained that Carl was entitled to half of all marital assets, plus reimbursement for any pension funds Mom spent without his permission. Carl sounded amazed that he had rights and options. He said he'd been living like Mom owned him for so long he forgot he was his own person. The lawyer was drawing up papers to freeze the joint accounts so Mom couldn't drain them. Carl would get his own account with direct deposit of his pension starting next month. I told Carl this was just the beginning of getting his life back. Mom started her counter-campaign within days. She called every relative she could reach and told them I'd manipulated the video footage using editing tricks. She claimed I coached Carl to say those things about her, and he was confused because of his age. She said the nanny cam footage was staged with actors, and I was trying to destroy her reputation. Uncle James called to tell me about Mom's stories and said nobody was buying them. He'd seen the raw pain on Carl's face in that restaurant and knew it was real. Aunt Linda told me Mom called her crying about betrayal and abandonment. When Linda tried to discuss the abuse Linda witnessed over the years, Mom hung up on her. My cousin from Dad's side said Mom called her too, but she told Mom the video spoke for itself. She said Mom's voice sounded desperate and frantic in a way she'd never heard before. Cousin Beth was one of the few who still believed Mom's version. She posted on social media about false accusations and family betrayal. She claimed I was jealous of Mom's strong personality and wanted attention. Several relatives commented on Beth's post defending me and sharing their own memories of Mom's cruel behavior. Beth deleted the post after an hour, but screenshots were already circulating in family group chats. 2 weeks later, I took Mia to her first appointment with Lillian Beyer. The therapist's office had soft lighting and comfortable chairs with toys in one corner. Mia held my hand tight when we walked in and barely looked at Lillian at first. Lillian didn't push her to talk right away. She showed Mia the art supplies and said she could draw while we chatted if she wanted. Mia slowly moved toward the markers and paper. Lillian asked gentle questions about what Mia liked to do and what made her feel safe. Mia started opening up about being scared at Grandma's house. She talked about the cold water and having to hold the heavy books. She described how Grandma's voice got mean when she made mistakes. Lillian listened carefully and validated everything Mia said. She explained that what Grandma did was wrong and not Mia's fault. By the end of the session, Mia was talking more freely and even smiled a little. Lillian told me privately that Mia showed strong resilience and with support she would heal. She said children recover better when they feel protected and believed. I scheduled weekly appointments for the next 2 months. 2 weeks after the party, Carl signed a lease on a small apartment 3 blocks from the bowling alley. Mitchell and 4 other guys from the league showed up on moving day with a truck. They went to the house while Mom was at church and loaded Carl's belongings quickly. Carl took his clothes and personal items and the furniture from the guest bedroom that his parents had given him. He left everything else behind. The guys finished in under 2 hours and drove the truck to Carl's new place. I met them there with cleaning supplies and groceries. Carl walked through the empty apartment, touching the walls like he couldn't believe it was real. He stood in the middle of the living room and said this was the first place that was truly his in 40 years. His voice broke on the last words. Mitchell clapped him on the shoulder and said they'd help him get furniture this weekend. The other guys started unloading boxes while I put sheets on the bed and stocked the kitchen. Carl kept thanking everyone until Mitchell told him to stop, because that's what friends do. By evening, the apartment looked lived in with Carl's belongings arranged in the rooms. We ordered pizza, and Carl ate 3 slices while laughing at stories the bowling guys told. I left around 8, and Carl hugged me at the door, saying he finally felt like himself again. The following Tuesday, Mom showed up at the hospital during my shift. The receptionist called security immediately when Mom started yelling in the lobby. I was on the 3rd floor when my supervisor Fiona found me and said there was a situation downstairs. We took the elevator down, and I could hear Mom's voice echoing through the lobby before the doors even opened. She was screaming that I turned her husband against her and poisoned the whole family. She demanded to see me right away. 2 security guards were trying to calm her down, but she kept pushing past them toward the elevator. Fiona stepped forward and told Mom she needed to leave the premises immediately. Mom's face was red and twisted with anger. She pointed at me and yelled that I destroyed her marriage and stole her family. The security guards took her arms and started walking her toward the exit. Mom struggled against them and threatened to sue the hospital. She said everyone would know what a liar I was. The guards got her outside and one stayed with her while she continued yelling in the parking lot. Fiona put her arm around my shoulders and guided me to her office. She sat me down and wrote detailed notes about everything that happened. She said we had grounds for a restraining order if Mom tried this again. My hands were shaking and Fiona made me tea while I called my lawyer. Back within 20 minutes, my lawyer called back with advice about documenting everything. I spent the rest of my shift writing down exactly what happened, including times and the names of everyone who witnessed Mom's behavior. Fiona added her own statement about the incident and the security footage. My hands stopped shaking by the time I finished the paperwork, but my stomach still felt tight. I drove home that night checking my mirrors constantly, even though Mom had no way to follow me from the hospital parking lot. Mia was at my neighbor's house having dinner, and I picked her up around 7. She asked why I looked tired, and I told her work was busy, but everything was okay now. She held my hand walking back to our house, and I felt grateful she didn't have to see what happened at the hospital. That weekend, Linda called and asked if Mia and I wanted to come over for Sunday dinner. She said James really wanted to see us, and they'd been talking about having a small family gathering. I hesitated because gatherings usually meant dealing with relatives who still defended Mom, but Linda quickly added that Mom wasn't invited. She said they wanted to start having family events without Mom's presence making everyone tense. I agreed to come and asked if I could bring anything. Linda said just ourselves and maybe Mia's latest drawings, since James loved seeing her artwork. Sunday afternoon, we drove to Linda and James's house, and I noticed several cars already parked outside. Inside were cousins and aunts and uncles I hadn't seen since the birthday party. The atmosphere felt different immediately. People were talking and laughing instead of speaking in careful, quiet voices. James hugged me at the door and thanked me for coming. He looked lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying something heavy, and finally put it down. Mia ran off to play with some younger cousins in the backyard, while I joined the adults in the living room. Linda brought out snacks and drinks, and nobody monitored what anyone ate or criticized portion sizes. One of my cousins made a joke that would have gotten him a lecture from Mom about respect, and instead everyone just laughed. We talked about normal things like jobs and hobbies and upcoming plans. Nobody walked on eggshells or changed the subject when certain topics came up. James mentioned he'd been learning to cook new recipes and showed pictures of elaborate meals on his phone. Under Mom's influence, he'd always claimed cooking was too complicated, but now he was making things from scratch. Linda talked about joining a book club and actually reading books she chose instead of ones Mom approved. The whole afternoon felt relaxed and genuine in a way family gatherings never had before. Around 4 o'clock, Carl showed up with Mitchell and some papers under his arm. He looked excited and nervous at the same time. He sat down next to me and pulled out an essay with red marks and comments all over it. His community college creative writing professor had given him an A- on his first assignment. Carl's hands trembled slightly as he showed me the pages. The essay was about a man who spent 40 years in a cage he built himself and finally found the courage to walk out. The writing was raw and honest and full of personality I'd never seen Carl express before. He'd written about feeling trapped and controlled, but also about discovering he still had interests and opinions and dreams. His professor had written comments like powerful imagery and authentic voice in the margins. I told Carl I was incredibly proud of him, and he smiled so wide his eyes crinkled. Mitchell clapped him on the shoulder and said Carl was the star student in their art history class too. At 68, Carl was rediscovering parts of himself that Mom had buried decades ago. He talked about the paintings they studied and how he never knew art could tell stories about human experience. He showed me sketches he'd started making in his notebook during lectures. They were simple drawings, but they had life and movement that surprised me. Carl said his art history professor encouraged him to take a basic drawing class next semester. James asked Carl about his apartment, and Carl's whole face lit up describing his space. He'd bought furniture he actually liked instead of what Mom deemed acceptable. He had his video games set up and books he'd ordered scattered around. He was learning to cook simple meals and eating foods Mom had banned for 40 years. Mitchell added that Carl had become a regular at their bowling league dinners, and everyone loved his dry sense of humor. I watched Carl laugh and joke with people who respected him as an equal, and felt amazed at how much he'd changed in just a few months. That evening, Mia climbed into my lap during dessert and asked quietly if we'd ever see grandmother again. The room got quiet, and I knew everyone was listening. I told Mia honestly that we probably wouldn't see grandmother anymore. Mia thought about this for a long moment, then said she felt sad about not having a grandmother, but glad she didn't have to be scared. Linda's eyes filled with tears, and she came over to hug Mia. She told Mia that being honest about complicated feelings was very grown up. James added that sometimes the healthiest thing is keeping distance from people who hurt us, even if they're family. Mia nodded and said her therapist Lillian told her the same thing. She asked if Linda could be like a grandmother instead, since she was nice and didn't pour cold water. Linda started crying for real then and said she'd be honored. The next week I heard from James that Mom's church friends were pulling away from her. Several women who'd been in her prayer group for years had stopped calling and attending meetings. James said one of them told him they'd heard the full story from relatives who attended the birthday party. Mom tried claiming she was persecuted for her beliefs, but her usual manipulation wasn't working anymore. People were seeing through her victim act and recognizing the patterns of control and abuse. Mom called James crying about being abandoned, but he told her actions have consequences and hung up. Another church member apparently confronted Mom directly about the abuse, and Mom responded by saying everyone was lying and turning against her. The woman told Mom that when everyone is saying the same thing, maybe the problem isn't everyone else. Mom stormed out of church that Sunday and hadn't been back since. Her social circle was shrinking as more people learned the truth and chose to distance themselves. For the first time in her life, Mom was experiencing real accountability, without enablers protecting her. Carl's separation proceedings moved forward, and the financial details started coming out. His lawyer discovered Mom had controlled over $200,000 of Carl's pension money over the years. She'd been taking his checks and depositing them in accounts only she could access. She gave Carl an allowance from his own money and spent the rest however she wanted. Carl's lawyer argued for significant reimbursement since Mom had no legal right to control his pension. Mom's lawyer tried claiming it was marital property, and she'd spent it on household expenses. But Carl's lawyer had bank statements showing Mom's personal spending on things like expensive clothes and jewelry and trips with her church friends. The evidence of financial abuse was overwhelming, and the judge wasn't buying Mom's excuses. The judge ordered reimbursement within 30 days, and Carl's lawyer made sure the court had enforcement mechanisms ready if Mother tried to avoid paying. Carl came over that evening after the ruling and sat at my kitchen table looking stunned. He kept touching the court papers like they might disappear if he looked away. I made him dinner and he ate slowly, savoring every bite of the spicy chicken Mother never let him have. He told me he'd spent 40 years believing he deserved her control because he wasn't smart enough or capable enough to manage his own life. The court ruling proved she'd stolen from him for decades, and he finally understood none of it was his fault. I watched him straighten his shoulders and smile for real, not the fake smile he wore around Mother to avoid her anger. Linda called the next morning asking if she and James could take Mia to the park. I agreed after confirming they understood my rules about snacks and bedtime and respecting Mia's boundaries. They picked her up at 10 and brought her back at 3, and Mia was glowing. She showed me the bracelet Linda helped her make and told me Uncle James pushed her on the swings for 20 minutes straight. Linda pulled me aside while James helped Mia put her craft supplies away. She said she'd been thinking about all the times she defended Mother, or made excuses, or told me to be more understanding. She admitted she enabled the abuse because confronting Mother felt impossible, and going along was easier. James joined us and said the same thing, that he'd known Mother was difficult, but chose comfort over doing what was right. They both apologized for pressuring me to forgive Mother and expose Mia to danger. I told them apologies meant something when backed up by changed behavior, and so far they were proving themselves trustworthy. Over the next few weeks, they became regular visitors, always respectful of my parenting and genuinely interested in Mia's drawings and stories. They started inviting us to dinners where they asked about Mia's week instead of criticizing her table manners. Mia began hugging them goodbye and asking when they'd visit again. I watched my daughter build relationships with family members who actually deserved the connection. Carl joined an art history class at the community college 6 weeks after moving out. He'd always loved museums, but Mother said they were boring wastes of time. The class met Tuesday evenings, and Carl would call me after each session excited about what he'd learned. He started visiting galleries on weekends and buying art books with his reclaimed pension money. One Tuesday, he called sounding nervous and happy at the same time. He said there was a woman in his class named Constance who'd invited him for coffee after the lecture. I told him to go and have fun, and he laughed like I'd given him permission to do something wild. The next week, he asked if I'd meet Constance at a coffee shop downtown. I brought Mia, and we found Carl waiting outside looking terrified. Constance arrived 5 minutes later, a woman around 65 with gray hair and kind eyes who shook my hand firmly. She told me Carl talked about his bowling trophies constantly, and she wanted to meet the person who'd helped him find his courage. We sat together for an hour while Constance and Carl discussed their class readings, and Mia colored at the table. I watched how Constance listened when Carl spoke and asked his opinions and treated him like an equal. She never interrupted or corrected or told him he was wrong about his interpretations. Carl's face was relaxed and open in ways I'd never seen around Mother. When we left, Constance hugged Carl goodbye and said she'd see him in class. Carl walked me to my car grinning and asked what I thought. I told him she seemed wonderful, and he deserved someone who respected him. He teared up and said he'd forgotten what it felt like to be treated like a person, instead of a problem to manage. 3 months after the birthday party, I stopped at the grocery store after work. I was comparing pasta prices when someone tapped my shoulder. Beth stood there with her cart, arms crossed and mouth set in a thin line. She said she'd been hoping to run into me so she could talk some sense into me. I kept looking at pasta boxes while she launched into a speech about family forgiveness and how I was being cruel keeping Mia from her grandmother. She said everyone makes mistakes and Mother deserved another chance, and I was teaching Mia to be unforgiving and cold. I put a box of penny in my cart and turned to face her directly. I explained slowly that protecting children from abuse wasn't cruelty, and maintaining boundaries with abusers wasn't being unforgiving. I said Mother had 40 years of chances with Carl, and 7 years of chances with Mia, and she'd used every single one to hurt and control. Beth's face reddened and she said I was exaggerating and being dramatic. I told her she could believe whatever made her comfortable, but I would always choose my daughter's safety over toxic family peace. She said I'd regret this when Mother died and it was too late to reconcile. I pushed my cart past her and said I'd regret exposing Mia to more abuse a lot more than I'd regret protecting her. Beth called after me that I was selfish and vindictive, but I kept walking. I felt completely calm checking out and driving home. No guilt or second-guessing in my chest. Mia's school sent home a flyer about Grandmother's Day in April. Mia brought it to me looking worried and said she didn't have a grandmother to invite. I asked if she'd like Linda to come instead since Linda had been so kind and respectful. Mia's whole face lit up and she asked if that was allowed. I called Linda that evening and she answered on the second ring. When I explained about Grandmother's Day, she got quiet for a moment and then started crying. She said she'd be honored and grateful and would make sure Mia had the best day possible. The event was on a Friday morning and I took off work to drop Mia at the school. Linda met us in the classroom wearing a nice dress and carrying supplies for the craft project. I watched through the door window as Linda and Mia sat together at a small table making tissue paper flowers. Linda listened carefully to Mia's instructions and praised her creativity and asked questions about her favorite colors. Other grandmothers sat with their grandchildren, but Linda gave Mia her complete attention like nothing else mattered. They made 3 flowers together, and Mia gave one to Linda to keep. Linda hugged it to her chest and told Mia she'd treasure it forever. When I picked Mia up after the event, she was bouncing with excitement. She showed me the flowers and said Linda told her she was proud to be her honorary grandmother. Linda walked out with us and thanked me again for trusting her with something so important. I saw tears in her eyes as she hugged Mia goodbye and promised to see her soon. Mother started calling Carl directly 2 weeks later. His phone would ring at all hours and he'd see her name and let it go to voicemail. The messages started with guilt about abandoning her after 40 years, and moved to threats about lawyers and money, and his belongings still at the house. Carl played me one voicemail where Mother said he was a coward and a failure, and she'd made him into something respectable. Another message had her crying about being all alone, and how could he do this to her? Carl's hands shook holding the phone, and he said part of him still felt guilty for leaving. I reminded him that abusers always tried to pull victims back with guilt and threats. His lawyer sent Mother a cease and desist letter, warning that continued contact constituted harassment and would result in legal action. The calls stopped for 3 days and then started again, Mother leaving messages about how the lawyer letter proved I was controlling Carl now. Carl's lawyer filed for a restraining order and Carl blocked Mother's number completely. He called me that night sounding lighter and said he felt relieved instead of guilty. He said every message from Mother reminded him why he left, and blocking her felt like closing a door on 40 years of pain. The legal separation took 4 months of paperwork and court dates and negotiations. Mother's lawyer tried to claim she deserved spousal support, but Carl's lawyer presented evidence of financial abuse and control. The judge ruled in Carl's favor on every point and signed the separation papers on a Tuesday in July. Carl was officially free with his pension restored and his bank accounts in his own name. He called me from the courthouse steps and I could hear the smile in his voice. He said he and Constance were going to the beach for a week to celebrate his first real vacation in 20 years. Mother had always said beaches were dirty and crowded and a waste of money. Carl sent me photos every day of that trip. Him and Constance walking on the sand at sunset. Him trying seafood Mother never let him eat. Him reading a book under an umbrella with his feet in the water. The last photo showed them both smiling at the camera with the ocean behind them, and Carl looked 10 years younger. He texted that he'd never been this happy or this free, and he owed me everything for showing him what life could be like. I texted back that he'd found his own courage and I was just proud to witness it. Lillian called me in for a parent meeting in August. She said Mia had made remarkable progress in therapy and was ready to reduce sessions to monthly check-ins. Mia's anxiety had decreased significantly, and she was developing healthy ways to manage her emotions when she felt scared or worried. Lillian showed me Mia's recent drawings, which had shifted from dark scenes of punishment to bright pictures of safe spaces and happy families. She said the healing wasn't complete because trauma takes years to fully process, but Mia was doing better than many children in similar situations. I asked if there were any concerns I should watch for, and Lillian said to keep providing the stable, supportive environment I'd already created. She told me I'd done everything right by removing Mia from the abuse immediately and getting her professional help. I left that meeting feeling proud of how far we'd both come since the cold water incident. 2 letters arrived in September from relatives I barely knew. The first was from a cousin on Mother's side who I'd met maybe twice at family gatherings. She wrote that she'd heard about the birthday party video and wanted to thank me for speaking up. She described her own childhood with Mother's sister, who used similar punishment methods and control tactics. She said she'd spent years thinking it was normal until she had her own kids and realized how wrong it all was. Watching me protect Mia helped her finally talk to a therapist about her own trauma. The second letter came from Mother's younger brother, who'd moved across the country decades ago. He wrote about growing up with Mother and their parents who believed in harsh physical discipline. He said Mother had learned cruelty from their father, and he'd escaped as soon as he could. He'd cut contact with the whole family to protect his own children from that environment. He thanked me for breaking the silence and stopping the cycle of abuse that had damaged multiple generations. I kept both letters in a folder and showed them to Lillian at our next appointment. She said breaking generational trauma often inspired others to face their own pain, and my courage was creating ripples through the family tree. Carl called in early October, sounding nervous and excited. He said he had something important to tell me, and could he come over? He arrived 20 minutes later and sat on my couch fidgeting with his hands. He told me he'd proposed to Constance the night before, and she'd said yes. He looked terrified, like I might disapprove or tell him it was too soon. I hugged him hard and said I was thrilled for both of them. He relaxed and started talking fast about how Constance made him feel safe and valued, and how different this relationship was from his marriage to Mother. He said he was nervous about getting married again after 40 years of abuse, but Constance's patience and kindness helped him trust that not all partnerships were about control. They were planning a small wedding at the courthouse in December, and he asked if Mia could be the flower girl. I said we'd be honored and Mia would be so excited. Carl left smiling bigger than I'd ever seen, and called Constance from his car to tell her I'd given my blessing. I watched him drive away, and felt grateful he'd found someone who treated him the way he deserved. Mother showed up at Mia's school on a Wednesday morning in late October. I'd already alerted the office that Mother was not an authorized contact, and should not be allowed near Mia under any circumstances. The school secretary called me at work and said Mother had tried to sign Mia out, claiming there was a family emergency. Security escorted Mother off the property while she screamed about her rights as a grandmother. The school filed an incident report, and the principal assured me they'd call police if Mother returned. I left work immediately and picked Mia up early. She hadn't seen Mother, but other kids had witnessed the scene and told her about the angry lady at the office. I explained calmly that grandmother had tried to take her from the school, but the teachers kept her safe. Mia asked if grandmother would try again, and I promised I would make sure she couldn't. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer about getting a formal restraining order. The lawyer reviewed the evidence, including the birthday party video, the school incident report, and Carl's harassment documentation. She said I had a strong case and filed the paperwork that same day. The court hearing happened 2 weeks later in a small room that smelled like old coffee and cleaning supplies. The judge reviewed all the evidence I'd submitted, including the school incident report, the birthday party video, and Carl's documentation of Mother's harassment. My lawyer presented everything in a clear timeline that showed a pattern of Mother ignoring boundaries and escalating her attempts to access Mia. Mother's lawyer tried to argue that grandmother visitation rights should override my concerns, but the judge cut him off. She said the documented abuse and school trespassing made this an easy decision. The restraining order was granted, requiring Mother to stay at least 500 feet away from me, Mia, Carl, and our homes. Mother sat rigid in her chair while the judge explained that any violation would result in immediate arrest. I felt Mia squeeze my hand as we left the courthouse, and I told her grandmother legally couldn't come near us anymore. 3 weeks after the restraining order, Mother drove past my house slowly enough that my neighbor noticed and called me. I immediately called the police and filed a violation report. 2 officers went to Mother's house and gave her an official warning that the next violation would mean jail time. The officer who came to take my statement said Mother claimed she was just driving through the neighborhood, but the dash cam footage showed her slowing down and looking directly at my house. He assured me they'd arrest her if she tried anything else. Mother apparently believed the warning because I never saw her car again. Uncle James called me in early November sounding tired. He said he needed to tell me what was happening with Mother because the family situation had shifted dramatically. He explained that more relatives had learned the full truth about Mother's abuse after talking to people who attended the birthday party. Several cousins who previously defended Mother had reached out to him asking questions, and he'd been honest about everything he witnessed. Mother's social circle had shrunk to just a handful of enablers who still believed her victim narrative. Cousin Beth remained loyal to Mother, along with 2 of Mother's church friends who thought I was being cruel to an elderly woman. But most of the extended family had either cut contact with Mother completely or set firm boundaries about what they'd tolerate. Uncle James said Mother seemed genuinely confused that her usual manipulation tactics weren't working anymore. She kept trying to rally support by claiming illness or financial hardship, but people were checking facts now instead of just believing her. He said she'd become increasingly isolated and bitter, blaming me for turning everyone against her. I thanked him for keeping me informed, but told him I felt no sympathy for Mother facing consequences of her own actions. Carl called me in early December sounding both nervous and excited. He asked if he could come over because he had something important to tell me. When he arrived 20 minutes later, he sat on my couch fidgeting with his wedding ring that he'd finally removed. He told me he'd proposed to Constance the night before at the art gallery where they'd first really talked, and she'd said yes. He looked terrified, like I might disapprove or tell him it was too soon after leaving Mother. I hugged him hard and said I was thrilled for both of them. He relaxed and started talking fast about how different this relationship felt from his 40 years with Mother. Constance made him feel safe and valued instead of controlled and diminished. He said he was nervous about marriage again after so much abuse, but Constance's patience and kindness helped him trust that not all partnerships were about power and control. They were planning a simple courthouse ceremony in 2 weeks, and he asked if Mia could give them a special drawing as a wedding gift. I said we'd be honored and Mia would be so excited to create something for them. Carl left smiling bigger than I'd ever seen, and I watched him drive away feeling grateful he'd found someone who treated him the way he deserved. The courthouse ceremony happened on a cold Tuesday morning with just 4 people present. Mitchell stood as best man wearing a suit he'd bought specifically for the occasion. I served as witness and brought Mia, who wore her favorite dress. Carl and Constance exchanged simple vows they'd written themselves about respect, partnership, and choosing love after pain. The happiness on Carl's face was beautiful to watch. At 69, he was starting a completely new life based on mutual respect instead of fear. When the judge pronounced them married, Carl kissed Constance gently, and then turned to hug Mitchell with tears running down his face. Mia presented them with a drawing she'd made showing Carl and Constance holding hands with a big heart around them, and the words, "New Family," written in her careful printing. Constance cried and said it was the most precious wedding gift she'd ever received. We all went to lunch at a small restaurant where Carl kept reaching over to hold Constance's hand, like he couldn't quite believe his freedom was real. Mitchell made a toast about second chances and breaking free from prisons we build, or others build for us. I watched Carl laugh at Mitchell's jokes and realized I'd never seen him this relaxed and genuine. The man who'd been so broken and controlled had found himself again. 6 months after the birthday party intervention, Mia and I drove to Aunt Linda and Uncle James's house for Thanksgiving. It was a small gathering of only the relatives who'd chosen accountability over enabling Mother's behavior. Aunt Linda had cooked a traditional meal, and the house smelled like turkey and pumpkin pie. Uncle James greeted us at the door with genuine warmth instead of the tension that used to mark family gatherings. Mia ran off to play with their dog while I helped Linda set the table. We sat down to eat without the usual fear of saying something wrong or triggering Mother's anger. The conversation flowed naturally about work and hobbies and Mia's progress in the school. Nobody walked on eggshells or monitored their words. Halfway through dinner, Mia looked around the table and asked if this was what normal families felt like. The question made everyone pause, and Aunt Linda's eyes filled with tears. She told Mia yes, this was what family should feel like, safe and happy without fear. Uncle James added that he was sorry Mia had experienced anything different and proud of how brave she'd been. Mia nodded thoughtfully and went back to her mashed potatoes, and I felt grateful we'd finally found what family gatherings should be. The letter arrived in late November on official law firm letterhead. Mother's lawyer wrote that Mother wanted to negotiate supervised visitation with Mia. The letter claimed Mother had learned from her mistakes and deserved a chance to rebuild her relationship with her granddaughter. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer, who responded within 2 days. Her reply was clear and firm. The restraining order remained in full effect, and Mother's documented pattern of abuse meant supervised visitation wasn't even being considered. My lawyer included references to the court record, the therapy documentation showing Mia's trauma, and the school trespassing incident. She stated that Mother would need to accept that her actions had permanent consequences regarding access to Mia. Mother's lawyer sent one more letter trying to argue that grandmother rights laws should apply, but my lawyer shut that down by citing the abuse evidence and restraining order. I never heard from Mother's lawyer again after that. Mother had to face the reality that she'd destroyed her relationship with Mia through her own choices, and no legal maneuvering could fix that. Carl called me in early January, sounding proud and slightly embarrassed. He said he'd started writing a memoir about his experience leaving an abusive marriage late in life. His creative writing professor had read the first 3 chapters and thought it could help other people trapped in similar situations. Carl explained he was writing about the 40 years of control, the small freedoms that showed him what life could be, and the terror and joy of finally leaving. He wanted to give hope to other people who thought they were too old or too trapped to escape abuse. I told him I was incredibly proud of him for turning his pain into something that could help others. He said writing it was hard because he had to face things he'd suppressed for decades, but his therapist supported the project as part of his healing. He asked if I'd be willing to read chapters as he finished them and give feedback. I said absolutely, and I meant it. Carl was taking his experience and creating purpose from it. That was the best possible outcome from everything we'd been through. One evening while I was tucking Mia into bed, she asked me a question I'd been expecting but dreading. She wanted to know if I thought grandmother would ever understand what she did wrong. I took a breath and gave her the honest answer. I told her that some people never take responsibility for their actions no matter how much evidence they see or how many people tell them the truth. I explained that Mother would probably always believe she was right and everyone else was wrong. But I also told Mia that Mother's refusal to understand didn't mean the people she hurt had to keep giving her chances. We protected ourselves by setting boundaries, and that was the healthy choice even if Mother never got it. Mia thought about this for a long moment, her face serious in the dim light from her nightstand lamp. Then she nodded and said she was glad we were safe now. She said she used to be scared all the time at grandmother's house, but now she only felt scared sometimes in dreams. I hugged her and told her the dreams would keep getting less frequent as time passed. She fell asleep holding my hand, and I sat there thinking about how much healing we'd both done in 6 months. The family had permanently split into 2 distinct groups. One side acknowledged Mother's abuse and either cut contact or set firm boundaries with her. This group included Aunt Linda, Uncle James, Mitchell, Constance, and about half of the extended relatives who'd witnessed the birthday party intervention. The other side still enabled Mother and believed her victim narrative. Cousin Beth led this group along with Mother's remaining church friends and a few relatives who prioritized family unity over accountability. I'd accepted that some relationships were beyond repair. The people who demanded I forgive Mother and restore contact weren't people I wanted in my life anyway. The family I'd built with Mia, Carl, Constance, and the reformed relatives was healthier than anything Mother's control had ever created. We had honest conversations and real boundaries. We respected each other's feelings and choices. Nobody manipulated or guilt-tripped or demanded obedience. It wasn't the large extended family I'd grown up with, but it was genuine and safe. That mattered more than maintaining relationships with people who'd rather protect an abuser than acknowledge the truth. 1 year after the birthday party intervention, Carl and Constance hosted a dinner at the home they now shared. It was a modest house near the bowling alley with a small yard and cheerful yellow paint. Mia immediately ran off to play with the neighbors' kids who Carl and Constance had befriended. I helped Constance finish cooking while Carl set the table with obvious pride in his own home. Mitchell arrived with his wife and Aunt Linda, and Uncle James came bearing wine and dessert. We gathered around the table Carl had picked out himself and shared a meal full of genuine laughter and warmth. The conversation ranged from bowling tournaments to Mia's school projects to Constance's book club. Nobody monitored their words or feared saying something wrong. Halfway through dinner, Carl excused himself and gestured for me to follow him to the kitchen. He pulled me aside with tears in his eyes and thanked me for giving him the courage to leave Mother. He said he'd been so broken down that he couldn't see any way out until I showed him what freedom looked like. I told Carl he'd found his own courage, and I just showed him what was possible. He shook his head and said without my intervention, he'd probably still be sitting in Mother's house asking permission to see friends. He said the best revenge against Mother wasn't her isolation or the financial consequences she faced. The real victory was the happiness and peace we'd all built, without her controlling everything. We walked back to the dining room where everyone was laughing at one of Mitchell's stories. Carl raised his glass and proposed a toast to breaking cycles and choosing health over toxic family loyalty. Everyone clinked glasses, and I looked around the table at the people who'd chosen truth over comfortable lies. Mia ran in from playing outside with grass stains on her dress and a huge smile on her face. She climbed into my lap and asked what we were celebrating. I told her we were celebrating family, the real kind that keeps you safe and helps you grow. She nodded like that made perfect sense and stole a bite of my dinner. This was what healing looked like, messy and imperfect, but genuine and full of hope for better tomorrows. Mia's therapy session that week felt different from all the others. She sat on Lillian's couch with her sketchbook open, showing drawings of art studios and classrooms instead of the darker images she used to create. Lillian asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, and Mia talked about being an artist who taught kids how to draw and paint. She said she wanted to be the kind of teacher who never yelled or made students feel scared. Lillian smiled and told her that sounded like a wonderful dream. After Mia went to play with the toys in the waiting room, Lillian pulled me aside and said Mia had processed the abuse better than most children her age. The nightmares happened maybe once a month now instead of every night, and Mia's confidence grew stronger each week. She wasn't just healing, she was building something new and healthy from the pieces. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months, watching Mia hum along to the radio without that haunted look in her eyes. Linda and James invited us over for dinner the following Saturday. While Mia played in their backyard, Linda and James sat across from me at the kitchen table with serious expressions. Linda started crying before she even spoke, saying they'd both been going to therapy to understand why they defended Mother for so long. James admitted they knew Mother was harsh, but convinced themselves it was normal because facing the truth meant admitting they'd enabled abuse for years. They said their therapist helped them see how fear of Mother's anger made them gaslight me instead of protecting Mia. Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand, promising they'd never doubt me again when it came to keeping Mia safe. James said they wanted to be the aunt and uncle Mia deserved, not the ones who chose comfort over doing what was right. I told them their accountability meant everything, and that rebuilding trust would take time, but I was willing to try. They both nodded and said they understood completely. 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to since the birthday party called within days of each other. The first was Sarah, who admitted she initially thought I was being dramatic until Mother tried manipulating her into taking sides against her own sister. Sarah said watching Mother's continued lies opened her eyes to how she operated. The second was John, who confessed he defended Mother because he was scared of being cut off from the family like I was. Both asked if we could slowly rebuild our relationship, and both said they understood if I needed time. I told them the same thing I told Linda and James. Mia's safety wasn't up for debate, and my boundaries around Mother were permanent. If they could respect that completely, then yes, we could try again. They both agreed immediately, and thanked me for giving them another chance. It felt strange having family members apologize and actually mean it instead of just trying to smooth things over. I tucked Mia into bed that night, and she looked up at me with those big brown eyes. She said she felt happy now and safe in our house. She told me she knew what grandmother did was wrong, and she was glad I protected her from it. My throat got tight as I smoothed her hair back and told her I'd always keep her safe no matter what. She hugged me and said she loved me, then rolled over and fell asleep within minutes. I sat on the edge of her bed watching her breathe steady and calm. The intervention cost me relationships with some family members and created complications that would probably last years. Mother was still out there isolated and angry, and some relatives would always believe her version of events. But Mia was thriving with confidence and joy instead of fear. Carl was free and building a real life with Constance. The cycle of abuse stopped with my generation instead of continuing to Mia's. That wasn't a perfect ending with everyone reconciled and Mother reformed. It was real justice, messy and incomplete, but absolutely worth every difficult choice I made.